All right. Patrick Schultz, thank you for joining us today. Greatly appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure.
Of course. So I think this is actually a very timely discussion that we're going to have today. And I say that because, the political environment is very interesting to say the least. But at the moment, we have tariffs, which are the talk of the town. But once that ship sails, we're going to be on to, to other things next. And, I think one of the big topics next certainly is going to be taxes and, what we could see there. We might see an extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Certainly would appreciate to hear your thoughts on what we might see there. But we've already also had some developments occur within the IRS as part of the Department of Government Efficiency. The government is running at a deficit, and the debt just continues to increase. And many people would assume that taxes are probably going to increase, as time goes along. But we just don't know. So I think it's great that you're going to be here. And you can certainly walk us through some of the strategies and some of the other developments that might take place within this stuff. But before I give you a proper introduction, actually let me dive into introduction real quick. We'll do that, and there's a lot of good topics, and we'll just dive into that stuff.
Perfect.
All right. So Patrick, you're currently the senior wealth planner at Clark Capital Management. In your role, you work closely with clients' legal and tax advisors to provide client-facing expertise across a wide range of wealth planning strategies. From our own experience at our firm, I can certainly say that you have extensive knowledge, and you specialize in many different areas. Some of those areas are estate and tax planning, charitable planning, executive and equity comp planning, business succession, pre and post transactional planning. There's just a whole swath of things that you specialize in. So, that's just a couple of them. Today we're going to spend most of the time discussing the estate and tax planning, along with some of the business succession topics. But prior to joining Clark, you spent some time at J.P. Morgan in their wealth management division on the wealth planning and advice team. And you oversaw the delivery of a holistic wealth management experience to advisors and their clients. And that's definitely a great experience to bring over to Clark.
Yeah, it was kind of necessary and interesting. We've been up and running now for about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a great experience. I get to go out and meet phenomenal advisors like you and great clients out in the field and do the fun parts of my job and also not have to ever bill anybody. So I get to leave behind like the bad parts when I was in private practice.
That's funny. Is there anything I missed in that intro? I know it's there's a lot, and you wear a lot of shoes and do a lot of stuff there. Is there anything I didn't touch on?
I mean, I was an attorney in private practice, so I'm still an attorney, but I no longer work privately for anybody. I was a partner at a mid-sized law firm in the Midwest for about 11 and a half years before deciding that I wanted to get out of billing people and get into like the more interesting parts of the job.
Right.
So those are the big changes. I spent about 4 years and some change out in Silicon Valley, which was probably the most interesting place anybody can work, especially when you're in the high net worth area. I've seen basically everything. Every once in a while I get surprised, but it's uncommon.
Is there any good stories you can recall from back then that you could touch on real quick?
I mean, I had a client who came in. She had about 35 million in her account.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat down and started discussing things. I said, well, what do you do? She's like, well, I was one of the early Facebook employees. I'm like, oh, very cool. What did you do? She goes, I'm one of the first administrative assistants. It's like, so you were an administrative assistant. How much did you make doing that job? She goes, I never made more than $70,000 a year. But because of all the stocks she had gotten, she had accumulated a massive amount of wealth. It just right place, right time. Really interesting. She was very humble about it. She knew what she didn't know, and she knew that she needed help. We kind of joke that concentration builds wealth and diversification keeps wealth. Like she was at the point where she had left Facebook and was like, okay, maybe I don't want to be in this anymore. And she definitely made the right choice, kind of looking back on it. So there was that. I've dealt with families who own professional sports teams and had to transfer assets to the next generation, get the team, moving forward, which is always interesting. I had a client that go through a meeting. He was a venture capitalist, and again, ask him everything he's got. He goes through everything. He goes, "Oh yeah, yeah," and I own a third of professional sports team. I'm like, usually people lead with that. Like
Yeah,
usually
yeah.
they're pretty proud that they own part of a team, and that's what they start with. And for him, it was just an afterthought.
That's a good problem to have, I guess.
Yeah, very, very. It's an amazing amount of wealth
Hmm.
concentrated out there. Just it's very interesting. We had a office in San Diego where we had to talk to all the staff, and it didn't matter if somebody looked like they were homeless. You had to treat them like they were a billionaire because there was a billionaire who banked there who looked like he was homeless. So we had to be very careful about everybody who came in because you didn't know walking off the street if the guy in 20-year-old flip-flops was worth $900 million or not.
It's really interesting that you say that because it's my wife and I go out to LA pretty frequently. She does a lot of stuff out there, and I just have the same, sort of thoughts when I look at people. It's number one, it's curiosity about what somebody could do, right? I think that's pretty interesting. That's part of what I really enjoy is in the role that I have. But um, there's when you're on the West Coast, or pardon me, when you're on the East Coast, there's not the same type of opportunities as there are out there. And Silicon Valley is a great example of that. So definitely an interesting point, and I certainly share the same thoughts when I think about that as well.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
it's a good place to start and just kind of interesting background. If you've ever seen the show Succession,
Oh yeah.
like I started watching it and I was like, I can't watch this. I in real life, like I can't do this shit. Because it was way too close to real life and everything I deal with. Then I was willing to like spend my free time watching.
That's so funny. That's so funny. But it's a great show.
Yeah, the acting was great and probably a little bit too good, which was the issue.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean. Can you provide a little bit of background on Clark? I mentioned, Clark Capital is we've done, we've been working with you guys for a long time, and you guys do some great stuff. And if you could maybe shed some light on some of that, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, so Clark is an institutional and independent money manager. So, we don't have a retail arm. We manage portfolios for advisors, and we're employee and family owned. So, we don't answer to banks. We don't answer to Wall Street. We don't answer to shareholders other than ourselves, which is phenomenal. So, the Clark family, it was founded by Harry Clark, who was an engineer turned financial advisor back in the 80s, and then kind of built it into this very interesting boutique asset manager. I mean, what's great is we will have clients who are like, well, could we work with you, just you? And we're like, absolutely not. Like we work with financial advisors. We're really good at what we do, but we also recognize the things that we don't do. And so we leave it to those who are really good at that. It's a great place to work. When you join, everybody who joins gets a share of stock. So everybody is an owner, which is phenomenal. Again, I was at JP Morgan relatively recently, and that's not the case.
Right,
When
right.
Jamie Dimon would get up and say something, and I was like, oh God, I'm going to have to answer questions about that. It was painful. Where I never worry that Sean Clark or Brendan Clark or Glenn Dorsey are going to get up and say something that is going to be painful. Like
Hmm.
they're have their head on their shoulders. They are involved. They are really, really great people to work for. In fact, it was one of the reasons why I joined when they approached me to create this wealth management program. Went and I watched a bunch of their office hours and things. I was like, Glenn, who is my manager, was just phenomenal. Like answers questions, knows his stuff, is confident. Just really good public speaker. I was like, ooh, Glenn looks like he'd be fun to work with, and he is. I didn't have those same worries that I've had elsewhere. So we're great. It's interesting. We shine in that space for households who have more than 500,000 in assets to manage. We're not for everybody. And
Hmm.
that's a good thing. And we're also not the shop where people go and they say, we want to do investing in, cryptocurrency. That's 100% not us. We're at core. Harry Clark has a saying, which is, we're not the get you rich folks, we're the keep you rich folks. So our job is to steward wealth and keep it growing appropriately and do well, but really manage that risk that's out there.
I think it's a great philosophy to have, right? Understanding, where your place in the market fit is and just trying to be the best at it that you possibly can.
One of the more interesting things, like we've grown from about 3 billion in assets under management over a 10-year period to about 42 billion in assets under management,
Wow.
entirely organic growth because we realize what we're good at and we do that. And
Yeah.
the things that we're not good at, we don't do.
Yeah, it shows, and you guys are able to have resources like yourself, right? Very accomplished, very knowledgeable people. Bring them in, provide more of a value add to your clientele, and it's fantastic. So let's dive into actually some of those topics that you specialize in. So, I sort of touched on it at the beginning. Estate and tax planning are, I guess, sort of the foundation of what you do, especially when you're talking about clients in the high net worth space, right? Tax planning and estate planning is extremely important for them. So when we think about like the foundations of estate planning, what are some of the things that you initially talk about with clients? What are some of the questions that you ask? What are some of the things that you look for in some of these higher net worth individuals?
So, and I think that big picture, everybody should have an estate plan of some sort. Because if you
Hmm.
don't have one, then you're stuck with whatever the government's going to give you, which is not typically very great.
Right, just
Uh,
probate.
right, just probate. And probate's awful. It's slow, it's expensive, and in most states, it's public. It's not something anybody wants to go through. So we think about how we avoid probate and really what our legacy is. I break down clients into two different segments, really. It's those who have legacy but not estate tax issues, and those who have legacy and estate tax issues. So they're very similar groups, but one's more complex. Once you got taxes involved, it's more complex.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that legacy isn't super important. The base of almost everybody's estate plan, from a million to a billion, is going to be a living trust or a revocable trust or an inter vivos trust. All the same thing. Depends on where you are in the country. They call them different things, but all the same. It's that living trust. It's that document which avoids probate, accomplishes your legacy goals, and then will kind of play in the tax rules in the way that if they drop, they'll be efficient. If you're in a state that has state to state tax, like New York or Illinois or Washington State, it helps maximize the amount your family can keep without having the state estate tax kicking in. But that's the core. With that, everybody should have a pour over will. That's just a will that says, in the event I forgot to put something in my trust, it goes to my trust. We don't want to use it because it goes through probate, but it's there just in case. And then advanced directives. That's that financial power of attorney, that healthcare power of attorney, that healthcare directive. And then some states have like funeral and burial and some other things. You want that package of documents, which really everybody should have. We build on that. The analogy I like to use is it's like building a house. This is literally the foundation of the house. When you have somebody come in who says they want, a charitable remainder trust or some other complicated, complex, really very useful vehicle, but they don't have the other things, it's, you're building on a foundation of sand. There's nothing there. You need to have the basics first, and the basics can be pretty complex. We're seeing, some parts of the country, I'll pick on Texas and New York for different reasons. For a very long time, they primarily used wills, and some of the wills would be 30 or 40 pages long. Basically, it was a living trust, but it was a will. So still went through probate, and the attorneys who drafted them still got paid for going through probate. We're starting to see that shift where living trusts are being adopted pretty much everywhere, as they should be. But still, some states like Texas will say, we have the best probate system in the country, and they do. But it's still the best of like the worst thing you could go through. So it's not really a badge of honor.
Yeah, 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 nobody really wants to have to deal with probate if they don't have to. And trusts are often seen as these things for the ultra wealthy or just the wealthy in general. Do you recommend them for everybody, or is there a net worth level that you recommend people use them at? How do you think about that?
So if you've got probably a more than a million of net assets, definitely. If it's under a million of net assets, it kind of depends on what your family composition looks like and complexity.
Hmm.
So if anybody who might inherit's a minor, absolutely you need a trust because otherwise it's a disaster. If your children are married to people who maybe you are hoping might be potential future ex-spouses, then absolutely you should have a trust. If your kids are in their 30s and are stable and it's not a huge amount of money, and by that it's all relative, but let's say your total assets are 750,000, you've got three kids, absolutely you could use beneficiary designations or payable on death or transfer on death, but those can go wrong. Like as an attorney, we see all the really, really bad things, like the things that went wrong. And so I've seen beneficiary designations where they were filled out wrong or got lost. And with the trust, you always know it was done correctly. Now, if your net worth is close to zero or negative, you probably don't need a trust. But in most states, it makes sense, especially if you want to accomplish your legacy goals. Um, Again, I've seen every bad thing you can imagine happen, and there's a lot fewer bad things that happen when you have a trust than when you don't have one.
If you're an individual that has a lot of your net worth tied up in your home, does a will suffice at that point, or would you say, it's still pretty subjective and the trust might make sense?
So some states will allow you to do transfer on death deeds where the house goes directly to your heirs when you pass away without needing to go through probate. Others won't. So most states, so the average across the country for probate is about 2%. So now you've got a $500,000 house. That's not an insignificant amount of money you're paying
Hmm.
the government to go through probate. Um, I would want to avoid probate if at all possible. So if your state allows for transfer on death deeds and you're otherwise everything's pretty simple, I'm okay with that.
Hmm.
But if your state doesn't, I'd rather have you pay $2,000 up front to do the living trust and avoid probate than to have your kids inherit. The other thing that people don't necessarily know about is that if a trust receives a house, and the trust sells that house in almost every state, you've got the entity selling the house and nobody has ever lived there who owns it who could have lived there. So your disclosures are a lot simpler. Once you inherit a piece of property and you own it directly, you have to disclose it like you lived there, even if you don't know what mom and dad did. So it gives you a layer of liability protection to have it go through a trust.
Gotcha. Okay, very interesting. Do you have any common or costly mistakes that you see people make, when they get started with this process?
Beneficiary does so a trust is only as good as what's in it. So you have to go through and make sure either it's done via beneficiary designation
Hmm.
or it's done via titling, like your change the title of things. If you don't do anything, your trust is just a paperweight.
Right.
So that's the biggest issue. Like I had when I was in private practice, had a husband and wife that came in, went through the whole estate planning process, did a trust for them, everything. She unexpectedly passed away, like 2 years later, and he comes in and the husband's all angry. He's like, "Why did you not put my wife's account in her trust?" I'm like, "Well," so I'm looking at him like, you guys didn't tell me about this account. I have no idea what this is." Turned out it was hers from prior to the marriage, and she hadn't really told him about it. So didn't put it into the trust because she didn't want to talk about it. And then it went through probate. So he was angry because he was feeling a little bit
Yeah.
betrayed. And it had to go through probate, which is like extra not great. And I was like, nobody like we shouldn't have to do this, but disclosure. You got to tell your attorney everything. Like your attorney is your confidant. They're the ones who can give you great advice, but
Mhm.
only if you tell them what you have and what your goals are. Um, I was talking to a client recently who had done an estate plan last year, and it was super simple, like a very simple living trust, nothing much there. He had like $45 million. Dollars. I was like, this isn't appropriate for you. You had $45 million last year. You have $45 million now. Why do we have this structure? He's like, well, I didn't want to tell the attorney how much I have because he might bill me more. I'm like, that's not the way that.
Oh, that's a funny way to think about it.
Yeah. Oh, and there's definitely a thought process out there that people think that their attorney bills them based upon how much money
Hmm.
they have. And if you find an attorney who does
Hmm.
that, run for the hills. Like it's hourly, we don't do that. That's just not the way it works. So, it's disclosure, letting your attorney know what you have, letting them know what your goals are, because
Hmm.
it's the most important thing. Because I have clients who come in and they'll say, "So what should I do?" And I'm like, "I don't know. What do you want to do?" Like, I'm not you. I don't know what you want to do with your assets. You got to
Hmm.
tell me, is charity important to you? Do you want it to go to kids? Do you want to go to grandkids? Is this a first, third, fifth marriage? All the crazy things that are out there. If your attorney doesn't know those things, they can't help you in the way that you need to be helped.
Yeah. You touched on a living trust, inter vivos trust, a couple different names for it, but there's also irrevocable trust. Could you differentiate the two and specify where each one serves their own purpose?
So your living trust is your will replacement vehicle. It's the foundation of most estate plans. It can be changed as much as you want. For income tax purposes, it's you. It doesn't need a separate Social Security number or EIN. It's You can revoke it. It's fine. Anything you want. Irrevocable trusts are more the advanced planning after that for people who are trying to solve for specific issues. Maybe they've got a disabled child. Maybe they have estate tax issues. What may, what it is in its name. It's irrevocable. Once you create it, you can't change it. Now, that doesn't mean the rules can't be really loosey-goosey. Like the rules could say, I can give money to my kids for any reason. I wouldn't do that, but they could do that.
Right.
People get confused. They think that irrevocable trust is going to be super restrictive. It's not. It's restrictive with what the rules say. The key is once you give money away, you can't take it back. So if you give a gift to somebody, you can't get it back. Or if you give a gift to charity, you can't get it back. But if you set up the rules in the right way, you can still absolutely be in charge of the assets. The biggest thing and the most important thing with an irrevocable trust is once the assets are transferred in there, they're out of your estate for estate tax purposes. What do I mean? That means that if, let's say, you've got $14 million dollars and the estate tax limit right now is $14 million, dollars, and you were to give away all of your assets to an irrevocable trust. Not saying you should do this, but this is my hypothetical because it's easy. We give it all in there and it grows to $30 million. Dollars. That $30 million, dollars, when you pass away, goes estate tax free because when you put it in, it was under 14 million and then it grew. So no estate tax. So that's what a huge advantage to irrevocable trusts is that you can get assets out of your estate for estate tax purposes. There are, again, other types like life insurance trusts. There's lots of single purpose trusts. Like when you think about it, your revocable trust, again, that jack of all trades, accomplish your legacy, does a ton. The irrevocable trusts tend to do specific things for specific purposes. So you should never have an irrevocable trust and not a revocable trust. But you often can have somebody who has revocable trusts and has no need for an irrevocable trust.
Gotcha. And we'll definitely touch on the estate exemption that you briefly discussed there. Um, but, that has me thinking, would somebody use an irrevocable trust for protection from creditors or, people that could be after their assets?
They can, but it's hard. So typically you have to put assets in a state that has creditor protections, Nevada, Alaska, Wyoming, South Dakota. Typically you wouldn't want to put all of your assets in there because you can't be in charge of one of those trusts.
Right.
So I had a client who ran a pain management clinic in Kentucky. He was very concerned about getting sued legitimately because there's a lot of liability that
Hmm.
goes with that. So we set up an Alaska Creditor Protections Trust, and we put about 20% of his assets in there. So it was his emergency fund that if he needed, he could get to. You have to have a trustee who's in charge of it. You can't be like being sued. You can't know that you could be sued. But for him, it was a really good idea. For most people who aren't engaged in really risky like business deals, it doesn't do anything. You're paying for a lot and you're losing control of your assets. And most people, the most important thing to them is control of their stuff. More than anything else, they want control. So you can do irrevocable trusts that are creditor protection for yourself, but usually we don't. Now, irrevocable trusts, when you create them for your kids or your grandkids, those get amazing creditor protections. It's really hard to get creditor protections for ourselves. It's really easy to get creditor protections for others with assets that aren't there. So all those irrevocable trusts that we might create for kids or grandkids, those have those awesome creditor protections. And you don't need to go to Alaska for it.
Wow. It's really interesting how everything is can be so subjective, right? It can be, really client specific, and there's not really one answer for everybody's situation.
Yeah, if there was, I wouldn't have a job.
Yeah, yeah, it's true, and it's extremely important, right? We're just touching on the surface, but there's so much that goes into it, and there's so many, different pathways you can go down where you can take a misstep, something like that.
Absolutely.
Um, do you have, when we're talking about real estate, do you have a preferred method of, protecting real estate, or I guess we can also lump in, passing it along to the next generation, stuff like that.
Let's talk about protection first. In
Sure.
my perfect world, and I fully acknowledge that my perfect world rarely happens in real life, I would have every piece of real estate in a separate LLC so that we have proper protections. So when you have an LLC, if it's done right, it protects the asset from other assets, and it protects others from suing you. They have to get through that LLC. So think about, I've got a rental unit in an LLC. If somebody trips and falls, they have to sue the LLC. They have to what's called breach the corporate veil to get to me. That my other assets they can't necessarily get to. So I want, in a perfect world, one for everything. I recognize that that's a huge pain. So I usually have clients think about how much are they willing to have at risk. My number is usually about $1 million. So $1 million worth of real estate per LLC, I'm fine with. Obviously, in California, that number's different.
Hmm.
But in most places, $1 million per LLC, and then have them roll up and have really good umbrella coverage. Um, the LLCs little complicated. If you've got lending, you have to get your lender involved. So sometimes you can't do it, and I get that. Then just make sure you have really good umbrella coverage. But when you can, you absolutely should. It's a phenomenal thing. But the key is that you treat that like it's an actual business. Like you're not paying your bills out of that LLC. It's got its own checking account. Pays its own bills. When it's ready to give you money, it sends that to your separate checking account, or it sends it to a master LLC. Like you go through the formal processes. An LLC that you don't go through the right formal processes is basically worthless. So not worth doing.
Gotcha.
But they're great planning tools as well. I could spend an hour talking about how to use them in planning, but just know like they're phenomenal. Like LLCs are just great, great, great tools in both the asset protection and the estate planning and legacy planning arenas.
Gotcha. So they could also be used for an individual that wants to separate their business and personal, liability.
Yep.
Yeah.
You use them, for instance, let's say I've got a machine shop. I
Sure.
probably have my operating business, the machinist business, in one LLC. And then I have a separate LLC for the real estate that I operate at because they're different things. So you want to think about separating your assets both in total liability and the types of liability. The liability you have at the machine shop is very different than the liability actually at the building. And so you don't want those to be mixed because you're exposing them to each other.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Once again, just touching the surface on how complex this stuff could be. We spent some time talking about the estate side. Let's talk about taxes for a second. I think, personally, I think it's about to become a huge topic that everybody's going to discuss. Right? It's not getting headlines today, really, or front page headlines. Tariffs are really getting that stuff. But I think once that ship sails, taxes are going to become a big issue, especially personal taxes. Do you have any thoughts around what we could potentially see come out of Washington in terms of an extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act? If not, are taxes going up? What do you personally think about that?
So we've got a few different factors at play here.
Hmm.
One, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires in 9 months from today. So we've got exactly 9 months and then it goes away. It is not the most popular law on either sides of the aisle. Like there's things people like about it and things
Hmm.
that they don't on both sides. Um, I don't see a long-term, like, I don't think that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is going to be made permanent in its present form. I think that we may see extensions of specific parts. We may even see an extension of a year, maybe a year on the current Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So, historically, when you have a unified government, so Congress and the president, all the same house, they like to pass tax bills because
Hmm.
they can do that. I would anticipate that they're going to pass something before the midterm elections next year so that they can get things in place. What that is, I have no idea. It's the biggest question we all have right now. I mean, we know that we're operating at a deficit, as you said earlier. Taxes are going to have to go up at some point. I don't see our present administration doing anything that's going to massively raise taxation. They may let key portions expire. They may do other things. We may get a whole different bill because they want to go a different direction. I mean, it's a complex world that we live in right now, and the TCJA, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, is just not terribly popular. So something's going to happen with it. I just don't know what. Now, the current we've seen float getting rid of the estate tax. I don't see that happening. The estate tax, whenever you hear somebody say, "Well, they're going to get rid of the estate tax," what the other part of that sentence that nobody talks about is, and then everybody's going to have carryover basis, and we're not going to have a step up in basis anymore. So everybody has to keep track of everything forever. And the IRS doesn't want to do that. We don't want to do that. Congress doesn't want to do that. So while we hear about it being a thing, it's never really going to be a thing.
Hmm.
It may be proposed, and then we'll come back, but I don't see the estate tax going away. And it generates, depending on year, somewhere between 2 and 6% of our annual GDP, like our total government spending. That's a big number.
Hmm.
And we don't talk about like 2 to 6% being big. It's a huge number.
Oh yeah.
Um, so I don't think we can get rid of it without replacing it in some way. So I don't know. I We'll see a bunch of crazy bills come through. What I tell everybody is do not so when we had the Biden administration in, early in the Biden administration, unified government, and Bernie Sanders would put in the craziest bills. I'm like, it's not going to pass, guys. Just don't worry about it. It's not going to pass. They're like, but what if it does? I'm like, it's not going to pass. Same thing here. Like we'll see crazy bills, they're not going to pass. So don't get worried about it until it passes both houses of Congress. There's no need to worry about it. Like look at it, sometimes laugh at it, go like, what are you thinking? Why are we wasting our time with that? But it's not going to pass. So
Gotcha. So do you have, when we're thinking about something that could actually change, right? The TCJA could actually change, and I don't know if it's probable or not, but it's certainly could. Do you have any strategies that you're telling people to implement, or ways that you're telling people to think about things in anticipation of this?
so on the estate tax side, we talk to clients if somebody's at, I would say that 15 plus million as a couple, or 8 or 9 million as an individual. I like to have them make sure that they've got planning in place and to think about whether or not we want to create some entities. We're not going to fund them at this point, but we might create some things that we could fund in short notice if we needed to. So if the estate tax was going to drop, we could transfer things into it and take advantage and be grandfathered in. They're typically the type of entities like spousal lifetime access trusts or irrevocable trusts that we might want anyways in a few years. Maybe we don't need them yet, but if we create them now, it lets us react to what the world is going to be. The hardest part about estate planning in kind of an topsy-turvy environment is the lead time for the attorneys. Because if you're freaking out, everybody else is. And they're all running to their attorney saying, oh my God, we got to do this. And the attorney's like, I'm booked out. So if we do it ahead of time, then we're in good shape. We can fund things. I don't want, at least until we know what's going to happen, anybody who is probably under 25 million as a couple giving away anything massive unless they were going to do it anyways. If you were going to buy your kids a house, buy a child a house, okay, let's do it. That's fine. But if you're like, I want to give away $8 million because I want it to be grandfathered in, let's wait and see if we need to do that. I think there was a period in 2010 where the estate tax expired, and everybody said that wasn't going to happen. And people gave assets away before because they were thinking that it was going to expire and weird things were going to happen. And then they wanted to undo it.
Hmm.
One of those things you can't undo. Once you've done it, it's done.
Yeah.
So I don't want people to rush into things.
Yeah, makes sense. You don't want to, They could make a change at the last second that could completely derail everything. You just have no idea. Can you touch on why those numbers that you mentioned are important? Right. So the exact terminology, the estate tax exclusion.
Yeah. Under present law, everybody has an amount of assets that they can have at death or give away during lifetime and not have any estate or gift tax associated with it. That number right now is about $13.99 million a person. So about $28 million a couple, just slightly under. The advantage of it is you can give it away or have it at death. And when you do, the asset, when you pass away, gets a step up in basis, meaning if you bought a stock for $100 and now it's worth $1,000, the day you die, if your kids or your spouse sells it, they don't have to pay any capital gains. So there's a big advantage to having assets in your estate. That number has changed a lot. The $14 million, $13.99 million, the highest it's ever been, other than the 1 year we had no estate tax, but again, we had carryover basis that year. It was $5 million not that long ago. And when I started practicing, which I'm old, but I'm not that old, was $675,000. It was a teeny tiny number. So we want to pay attention to that number because it changes. Every year it's set for inflation. When the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires, if it does, the number is scheduled to go from 14 to 7. So you could have $7 million without any exemption. So that means a couple could have 14 million. We want to monitor that. We want to know where we're at. Again, I don't know what's going to happen. I think we'll extend at least the estate tax portion for a bit because they'll want to do something with that. But we don't know for sure. Now, coupled with all of that, I also want to remind clients that everybody can give away what's called an annual exclusion. It's the amount you can give in any year without having to report it to anyone. It doesn't count as income to anybody. It doesn't come off your lifetime exemption. It's $19,000 now. So if you're married, you can give $38,000 to as many people as you want, and it does not count against your lifetime, that $14 million number. It's important to know just because people start to freak out. They get in there, they're like, oh God, I can't give something away because I'm going to incur a tax. Well, the first 38,000, you don't incur anything. And let's say, for instance, you've got $5 million and you want to help one of your children and give them $500,000 to buy a house. That's not taxable. You have to report it. You have to say to the government, hey, I gave my child $500,000. It's not money laundering because that's the first thing they'll ask. Was this money laundering? No, it's not. So we give it to our child, we report it. Now when I die, as opposed to having $14 million, I can have $13.5 million. No tax was due, but we can still do all that planning. So people start to get kind of tripped up there. I want to make sure that they know the estate tax limit's really high. If you have less than under current proposed law, 7 million, you can do kind of whatever you want in the gift world. It's fine. You just have to fill out the form at the end of the year to make sure that the government knows what you did.
So that 13.9 number that you mentioned, that was increased because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, in addition to regular federal income taxes being lowered, corporate taxes being lowered, a whole bunch of different things.
And remember, when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed, it made the corporate lowering permanent and everything else temporary. And the reason for that was they passed it through reconciliation, and through reconciliation, it has to be tax neutral.
Do you think the effect of that is a little underappreciated, right? The fact that corporations might have or do have these permanent decreases in tax?
Yeah, I think it's very underappreciated. Corporations definitely benefited, and that can help for small business owners and lots of others, but people benefited, but not permanently. It was kind of the way they sold the bill was, we'll help people out for a bit. We'll help corporations out forever, or at least until we get a different administration.
Right. You touched on the 18 or 19,000 that individuals can give away. Do you have any other strategies that you recommend high net worth individuals utilize outside of that one in order to legally reduce their estate? Or is that the primary route that you suggest?
So that's the lowest hanging fruit in the world because you use it every year. It's huge. Yeah, it's super effective. When you think about it over a 10-year period, if you've got 3 kids, we're giving away $1 million, and all the growth on that, that's huge. So powerful, but there's lots of other ways to do it. So one thing to remember is the paying for education directly doesn't count against anything. So you can always pay any amount of money for education. So I will often talk to wealthy clients and say, no, don't fund a 529. What I want you to do is create a trust for your grandkids and pay for and put money in there every year so it grows. And when it comes to education, you just pay for that out of pocket because you can do any amount. Same with medical expenses. Kind of funny aside, when I was a young attorney, that medical expenses came up. I had a client who was wondering if it was all medical expenses that could be covered, and the research was yes. And I asked why. He's like, well, does cosmetic surgery count? And it does. So cosmetic surgery also counts as for an unlimited amount. Those are kind of the next lowest, kind of easiest things. And there's lots of other things. For instance, we were talking about LLCs earlier. There's a concept called fractionalization. If I have an LLC, and let's say I've got $1 million piece of property in that LLC. So if I own 100% of it, it's worth $1 million. $1 million piece of property in there, really, really simple. If I give 10% of it to one of my kids in trust, because I'm not going to give it to them outright, we get what's called fractionalization. The IRS says that you wouldn't pay in a dollar for dollar, you wouldn't pay 10% for 10% of something if you're a minority owner. There's no market for it, all of those different things. So you get a discount, usually on real estate or illiquid assets, runs about 30%. And then the portion that you own, now you own 90%, that 90% you get a discount on in ownership because, again, you don't own 100%. Now, it's not going to be as good as the 10% because you are a majority owner, but it's still pretty good, maybe 25%. So you can take $1 million asset and make it worth $750,000 just by giving a portion to your kid's trust. And that's one of the simpler things you can do. And we've done that with massive things. And there is some businesses, because of the nature of them, we can get really, really good discounts on. The IRS even lets you do it on accounts. So let's say we've got a family investment company. The only thing that company owns is cash and marketable securities. Now, it's not a great number. It's about 10%, but it's 10%, a 10% discount on things that can be sold immediately just because we put it into an LLC and we split it up. So there are ways to absolutely reduce the value of your estate other than just the giving away the 30 or 19,000. But the 19,000 is the easiest.
Gotcha. That's extremely interesting, and a bunch of cool stuff in there that you could utilize.
Oh yeah. It's and most of the techniques. So when you get into the kind of complex estate planning world, you're layering 3, 4, 5 different techniques together to get the best sort of benefit out.
Gotcha. I want to tie this into sort of business succession. I know that's a big topic of yours, and that's something, especially in the wealth management industry. I think the average age of a financial advisor is 65 or something like that. So, we're even seeing it amongst my colleagues, starting to experience, that whole cohort of worker starting to exit to retirement. What are the basics of business succession when you talk about it? What are some of the groundwork that you lay, and some of the initial questions or ideas that you might have?
So I always want to know first what their corporate structure is. Are you a C corp? Are you an S corp? Are you an LLC? Are you a partnership? Because it's so much easier to sell a corporation than it is to sell something that's tied to you as a doing business as. So that's always my first, what are you? And if you are nothing, let's get you into something. Then it's who's your buyer? Who's interested? Who are you looking? Is it family succession? Or are we selling to the outside? Or are we selling to employees? Because that changes the type of deal. If it's family, it's probably going to be some part gift, part sale, or there's discounts. If it's employees, might be friendly, or it might not, depends. And if it's the outside, are we selling to private equity? Or are we selling to, like a strategic buyer, somebody who does what we do? Like I run Pat's Heating and Cooling, and Dave's Heating and Cooling wants to buy me. So we want to think about who are we selling, or what's that succession look like? That really affects things. And then timeline. When do you want out? Because we've all talked to the person who's like, I'm burned out. I wanted out 6 months ago. And others who are like, I'd like to get out in the next 2 to 3 years. Or somebody who says, and my number is, if you say it's more than 6 years, that means you have no idea. Like I know I need to retire at some point, but I'm not there yet.
Anything specific in this topic you want to touch on, or that you think we could go down?
I think the biggest thing to know, so for general business, almost any business that makes money is saleable. Sometimes it takes some time to get it into a position where somebody could buy it. But when somebody says like, I'm just going to close shop and walk away, I'm like, you're just leaving money on the table. Like clients need to know maybe they're not going to get as much. Like my father was an architect. It was a two-man shop. And when he retired, he didn't get a huge amount, but he was the copies of his plans to somebody who was interested. So it was something. Even though it was just basically him and one other guy for the last 30 years designing houses, almost every business, if it makes money, is profitable, has a buyer out there.
Gotcha. Do you see the majority of people, um, doing something with family members, or is it? I know this is sort of a strange question because every situation is different. But are you seeing a lot of family deals take place, or is it all stuff to maybe an outside buyer?
For what I deal with, because the clientele that I deal with tend to have more assets. So
Yeah.
I would say out of if I had 100 clients who came in who were dealing with business succession in some way, 94 of them are going to be selling to an outside somebody. And then the six who aren't are either going to be selling to employees or transferring to family. Now, that's just because of the nature. Most people, when they run a small to medium sized
Hmm.
business, most of their wealth is tied up in the business. And so they can't necessarily give it to their kids or sell it to their kids. They need access to that liquidity. Now, some have done really well. So once you start getting bigger, that business crosses probably that $20 million
Hmm.
threshold in wealth, they've received enough over the years that they don't necessarily need to sell it. They can bring it to that next generation and know that they're fine. So I deal with it. It's just not as common in my neck of the woods. Now, when I was in private practice, we did family business succession among families all the time. There were lots of businesses where somebody had a good life, they were retiring, they had a few $1 million, and they were getting that business to the kids. Happened all the time. But again, that different kind of private practice versus the role I'm in now.
How does I want to go back to the Major League Sports team owner that you mentioned at the intro? When somebody like that comes to you for advice, right? How is this? I know a situation like that is it's sort of at the highest level of complexity, maybe. But like, how does a conversation like that go, or and how does maybe a strategy like that get implemented?
So usually the first question is, what have you done already? And do I have to fix anything that was done previously? So I would rather have somebody be a clean slate that has way too much money and shouldn't be a clean slate than have a bad plan. Now, we deal with a lot of ones that are older, we'll kind of get a handle on what's there and then ask them, what do you want to do? Like, what's the goal here? Is it going to one child or is it going to be split equally? What are we going to do. Now, dealing with professional sports teams is harder than most other transactions because the professional sports teams, I'll use the NFL as an example.
Hmm.
The NFL says that each team can have one attorney, and that one attorney can talk to the NFL. So it's usually a business attorney who does things. Now, that business attorney has no idea about estate planning. So I can't talk to the guy at the NFL, their attorney, about what we want to do. I have to like play telephone with somebody who talks to the NFL because the NFL doesn't let you do anything without like explaining why you're doing it. They have to sign off on everything. So it becomes a lot more difficult just in structure because of the way they are. And I get it. Some of the teams are managed like they might have 9 different owners and tons of attorneys. The last thing they want are people doing things at cross purpose. Like it makes sense, but on the practitioner side, man, is it frustrating. Like trying to get two business attorneys to understand why we're going to be transferring a portion of the team into a trust for, a grandchild is quite the endeavor.
Yeah, we're doing something internally now where we have a client that got estate advice from an attorney that doesn't specialize in estate planning, um, and it's been a little bit of a complex process.
So generally in the legal world, find somebody who does like the one thing. Like I'm an estate and tax guy. Like that's
Hmm.
what I do. So it's kind of that whole area. If you come to me and say, Patrick, I need some help with a divorce, I'm like, so this is what I know. Divorces are bad and they're painful and they're expensive. That's it. Don't find somebody who's a generalist. Don't find somebody who dabbles. They have to do what they do. And in the estate planning world, it becomes even more specialized. I tell clients there's kind of three areas of estate planning attorney, and they're all good as long as they're specialists, but they're very different. You've got your kind of your mass affluent who typically deals with clients, I would say, under $1 million. Great people, legacy, all of that, but we're not talking multi-generational wealth. We're not talking estate tax issues, but good. Then we've got the kind of high net worth attorney where clients have legacy issues. They might have some charitable things going on, but they probably don't have a federal estate tax issue. They might have a state estate tax issue, depending upon the area. So they're not dealing with some of the really complicated stuff. And then you've got the ultra high net worth attorneys who deal with estate tax. That's where I play in. That's what I do. Doesn't mean that all three aren't great attorneys, but if you come to me and you're like, so I need a basic living trust, I'm like, fine, but that's not really like kind of not a great use of what I do.
Right.
If you go to an attorney who does just living trusts all day long, and you say, "Hey, I need a grantor retained annuity trust," they're like, "I have no idea what you're doing." Um, yeah, great attorneys, and typically good attorneys at every level will self-select, and they'll be like, "So you don't want me for this, and here's why." The mass affluent attorney is going to be like, "You don't want me because that's too complex," and blah blah. The ultra high net worth attorney is going to be like, "You don't want me because I'm going to charge you $1,600 an hour for something that should be $300 an hour, and you don't want to pay me for that."
So I know you've given a lot of background on the experiences that you've had, but how did you sort of find your fit in that ultra high net worth space? How did that become of initial interest to you, and how did you find yourself in there?
So, as a young attorney, I specialized and went into estate planning early, worked for a boutique firm that had some higher net worth clients, and that's where it was fun, where it's kind of, for me, it was interesting. It's more problem solving than anything else. And then had the opportunity to work with some very, very high net worth clients along the years and just kind of get kept looking for more complex, interesting things. And ended up, when I left private practice, going out to the West Coast where I got to deal with all of the most interesting things.
Gotcha. That was, yeah. I would assume the Silicon Valley experience would definitely mold you into the.
I mean, I had a client who had a hobby farm in Menlo Park, which is one of the most expensive places in the world. And so we're talking, and like, so how big is this farm? And it's, yeah, not it's huge in this, like when people talk about it's 30 acres.
Hmm.
But 30 acres in Menlo Park is about $100 million.
Wow.
Yeah. And he's like, well, we bought it back in the 70s. Okay. Well,
That's funny. That must have been passed down from generations and stuff like that.
yes. Well,
Yeah.
and California has interesting tax laws where they can't raise your taxes more than 2% per year. So if you bought it in the 70s, it could be worth $100 million now, and you could still be paying $10,000 a year in taxes.
Gotcha. That's pretty cool.
It is, except for it causes very weird because economics generally. So if I own a house and I paid, well, let's say $200,000 for it in 1984.
Hmm.
When I bought my next house, would I sell that house or would I keep it and rent it and buy another house? Because my new house is going to have higher taxes. The old ones don't reset. So you would run into clients who had like 5 houses because they would just keep buying more. So you have a really compressed like supply side, which causes all the prices to go up. It's this weird circular issue.
But in aggregate, aren't you still paying more in tax if
Well,
under that strategy?
well, you've got enough wealth that you can buy another house, and you were going to buy a house anyways. You were
Yeah.
getting out of that house because you'd outgrown it typically. Now, I'm not going to sell it. I'm going to rent it, and I'm going to be able
Mhm.
to rent it at market rate, and I don't have to pay a ton of tax on it. So now you're cash flow positive. Like it's one of the few places in the world where you can be cash flow positive on houses that otherwise should not be cash flow positive at those rents.
Gotcha. That makes sense. All right, let's dive into you know uh, a couple things about legacy dynamics here. So, um, what's your advice for, wealthy families, who want to ensure that their heirs don't, squander the wealth or, do anything like that?
So structure wise, modern structure. Let me do old structure first. So the old structure was if you're gone at 25, they get a third of the money. At 30, they get half of what's left. At 35, they get the remainder, which is basically just all right, at 25, you're going to blow it. At 30, we hope you've learned a lesson. Maybe not. At 35, yeah, this is your last chance. Like modern structure is typically at prior to age 30, money is held in trust. The child can have income from it. Somebody else is going to be in charge. At age 30, they become a co-trustee and learn how to manage it. And then at 35, they take over the account. We don't ever write a check to somebody. It doesn't matter how brilliant you are. Like if somebody walks up and says, here's a $2 million check, go figure it out, you're probably going to do something stupid with it, at least with a part of it. So I talk to clients about that structure, making sure that if we're not going to ruin people, so to speak, nobody wants a trust fund kid. So building guardrails about things and having conversations about wealth early and getting people involved and having them understand what wealth is and how it works. A lot of times that's through charitable giving, helping manage a family charitable account, being on an account with somebody where they can help invest, like getting involved in the process. The worst thing you can have is for a child or grandchild to be divorced from the money and not understand what it takes to earn. Like, so they're just like, I don't know, I get my check and it's fine and I just spend. Um, it's really being active and intentional about it. What I don't like, speaking of Silicon Valley, I had some of the most interesting engineers who could ever deal with the Facebook and the Google and all the different FANG engineers. And a guy who was like, well, what about if I build a point system where if my child does a certain thing, they get points and then they can get distributions. I'm like, in 20 years from now, when you're gone, do you not think that they will have figured out how to break that? The last thing you want is to add too much complexity to the system. You want it to be relatively simple. You want people you trust and to impart like just knowledge as well as ideals to people. Like that's the most you can do. Raise good kids.
Hmm.
It can be hard. Um, but probably the single worst thing you could do is give children lots of money early. The earlier you get wealth, the generally the worse off things are because it kills your drive. Like you don't feel like you need to work, and they don't necessarily have the time reference to think about how much wealth is wealth. I was reading an article the other day where somebody had inherited $800,000 at 24 and so that they were retiring. Like that's not enough money to get you through life.
Especially out in the West Coast if you're out there.
In most places in this country, if you inherit $800,000 in your 20s and quit your job, you are
Yeah.
not going to turn out well.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. So I would assume financial literacy plays a big part in these strategies. And does that often fall on the shoulders of the parents or the guardians, or do you see like a financial professional having a big role in that? What do you typically see?
So the best thing we can do is if wealthy clients get their children involved with their financial advisor early, introduce them, start opening their own accounts, not big, but so they have that relationship and they understand how it works. And it's not some, mystical, God only knows what's going on in the background. Like have them, you know, really deal with it and see what it takes to earn and see how the markets affect things and how to ride things out. Like financial literacy is really important, but having that relationship, if the client doesn't have a great relationship with their financial advisor that they can transfer to their kids, what's going to happen is when that client passes away, the child doesn't know the advisor and doesn't know what to do, and they go do something probably not all that smart with it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's something we're trying to implement or not trying, we have, but we're always trying to evolve it. Is getting the next generation involved. We've had discussions about building out our own financial literacy program for that new generation of investor. So yeah, it's definitely becoming more prevalent.
Agreed. It was when I was at JP Morgan, it was one of the most requested things that we got from the ultra high net worth group would be to like lead a class for that next generation about these things.
Yeah, because there's nowhere else to learn it, right? The universities and high schools don't really teach it, um, and so yeah, that's it's left on financial advisors and other financial professionals to do so, and
Agreed.
and the parents. All right, so I want to touch on sort of what you think the future of estate planning might look like, real quick. We have. I mentioned tariffs are all in the news right now, but so is AI, right? Everybody's talking about AI. I've already started to see, these sort of fintech startups for estate planning pop up. What do you think the future of estate planning might look like? And what sort of effect do you think that might have on how we do things?
So I think it's going to be very similar to, I'm going to really, this predates me, but uh, the introduction of it just generally forms and computers into the estate planning world brought it estate planning to yeah, to the masses, so to speak.
Hmm.
It's very very interesting if you look at the price of a living trust over the last 40 years, the price has only gone down. It was in 1980, it was between six and $10,000 to do a living trust, but because it's become less, you know, there's less involved as far as man hours. The prices come down. I see AI helping that, so that you've got better forms, things that can be customized in a way that makes it cost less and is a little more custom to people. I don't see it replacing attorneys in any real way. Know, at the end of the day, like it's got to do a really good job, and we've seen lots of AI that hasn't done a really good job.
Hmm.
Uh, so there's a lot of skepticism there, but I do see it making it more efficient. Cutting costs down, making it so that simple documents, powers of attorney, your basic will could be done entirely with AI because it's almost the same form every time. So I see that. I see there probably being a few companies that are out there, but for instance, this was before the AI revolution, but remember LegalZoom,
Oh yeah,
who kind of was trying that? And if you've ever read a LegalZoom document, they're not great.
yeah, we've had one client come in with one of those.
Yeah, and they weren't inexpensive. I had a client who came in when I was in private practice who paid $800 for useless paper. And I looked at it, I'm like, this is would have cost us $1,200 to do. You didn't really save anything. You literally didn't save anything because it was awful. But even if it was good, you wouldn't have really saved all that much for the pain because then they had to print it out, they had to go find somebody to notarize it. Like it was intensive. So I think that we'll see a good like structure there. We're going to see costs come down. I think that we'll see some fintech companies doing things. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to change all that much in the scheme of the universe. Efficiency more than anything else. I don't foresee anybody just being able to type in things and then have it all spit it all out and be done. But just I wouldn't unless we see things change a lot. I just wouldn't trust it to give me everything I need. And the legal world is all about having everything there. Like all it takes is missing one paragraph in a trust to make it useless.
Right, right. Yeah, I feel the financial advice world is very similar, and down a similar trajectory. Another thing that's become prevalent, and we can sort of say surface level with this one, is cryptocurrency. Has that made estate planning more complex for clients that have a big part of the net worth in it, or something like that?
So the primary thing that's become more complex is for all digital assets is making sure that your living trust has access to it and that you keep recorded physically somewhere passwords and logins and all of that because they're just assets, but they're assets that if somebody loses the magic piece of paper or you didn't put it on the magic piece of paper, they're become like there's no way to get to them. As we know, from the guy who spent the last what was it, 5 years digging in that dump,
Hmm.
trying to find the hard drive. Like they're assets which can go wrong really easily. Yeah, wallet gets hacked, you lose your password, throw out the computer, all of those different things, and it's gone.
Yeah, yeah, That's a tricky one for sure.
At the end of the day, though, it's just an asset. And I foresee us becoming more systematized with that and it becoming harder to screw up. Again, humans are great at screwing things up. So we'll always screw up in some way, shape, or form, but it should be at least a little more difficult.
Right. Any closing remarks or anything, any parting advice that you'd like to say about, estate planning, tax planning, anything like that?
So the biggest thing I tell everybody is it's never too late to start. The earlier you start, the better. Engage a professional. Talk to your financial advisor. Talk to your attorney if you don't have an attorney. Like meet these people, and work with people you like. I know that sounds silly, and I'll say this as an attorney. There are a lot of attorneys out there who have the personality of wallpaper paste. And if you don't like the person you work with, you're not going to go see them. You're not going to visit them. You're not going to get more work done. So your things will become outdated, and that's not great. So engage, again, and never feel bad about not having done it. I've dealt with clients with hundreds of millions of dollars who come in and they have zero estate plan. It's fine. We'll deal with it. Not a big deal. And I know nobody likes talking about death and taxes other than the estate planning attorneys, but we'll make it so it's not painful. We'll get through it. The final thing I leave people with is any plan that you do is really a midterm plan. It's for the next 0 to 10 years. If something happens, it's always going to change. It's always going to adapt. The biggest impediment we see to people engaging is like, well, I don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. Neither do I. But we probably know what's going to happen in the next 5 years. So that's what we need to plan for. You'll redo your documents later. Don't let the fear of the unknown stop you from planning.
Yeah, that was something that is extremely important, but we didn't touch on, was how it's not a set it and forget it. And you always need, not always, but always, frequently make updates, check in, and make sure everything's up to date.
I tell clients at 5 years, 5 years are major life events. They should look at it. Typically after 10 years, there's enough that's changed in your life, your wealth level, or the laws that'll need an overhaul. Again, not a big deal. It's like maintenance on a car, but you got to do it.
Yep. Awesome. Well, Patrick, we're going to do that. We're going to do another hour of talking about this stuff.
Another day.
Yeah. Thank you so much, man. This has been great. This topic can be so complex, but it can also be cool. It can be interesting to talk about. You can learn a lot, and oftentimes you're not just doing it for yourself. You're doing it for the next generation and, the people that you care about the most. So thank you so much. We greatly appreciate you taking the time.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
You got it, Patrick. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. This is the Sharpe Minds podcast. And thank you so much for the support. And we'll see you in the next one.
Sharpe Minds is produced and hosted by Michael LaFata and directed and edited by Alex Weimer. Our music is made by Tony Sapiato and licensed through Soundstripe. Michael LaFata, Financial Advisor, Archstone Financial, 508-453-9800, 324 Grove Street, Worcester, Massachusetts, 01605. Securities and advisory services are offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA, SIPC, a broker, dealer, and registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity. Archstone Financial is not a subsidiary nor controlled by Cetera Wealth Partners. The views stated in this podcast are not necessarily the opinion of Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Due to volatility within the markets mentioned, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable. However, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed. Past performance does not guarantee future results. The guest speaker interviewed in this podcast is not affiliated with or registered with Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC. Any information provided by them is in no way related to Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, or its registered representatives. For a comprehensive review of your personal situation, always consult with a tax or legal advisor. Neither Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, nor any of its representatives may give legal or tax advice. Cryptocurrencies, digital assets, and other blockchain-related technologies such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, NFTs, and others are not securities, not regulated, and not approved products offered by Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, and cryptocurrencies or other blockchain-related non-securities products cannot be offered, recommended, or held by the firm.